Enoi Extreme Media UJ. Subscribe for all updates.
From the time we heard from Marek, I think I've been crying. Not that it's the first story, and Marek, we are sorry you had to go through that. Not that it's a first or new story. I attended the human rights exhibition in Nairobi, where all politically associated victims of torture were present. I saw the Uganda I never knew in that exhibition, and I know after that we were under constant harassment by the state on why we had to go to Nairobi for that joint exhibition by then FDC, National Unity Platform, hosted by the Human Rights Commission of Kenya, the NGO. At times you don't know which country we are living in, whether you are in the middle of Gaza, whether you are in the middle of former Kosovo, Somalia. At times it's difficult to tell. Imagine what he went through in a space of about 2 or 3 days. Things I'm sure he would never have imagined that he would go through, especially as an advocate, where you think you are a defender of other people. You are a defender of society. And then you find yourself in that dungeon. And we are all potential victims of that. Everybody. You look at stories of the basement, teaching Runyankore. Unfortunately, a language that happens to be, the mother language for some of us. What kind of nation are we going to hand over to our children and grandchildren? I know many of the people who enjoy impunity don't think about such things. But if your grandchildren ask us 40 years from today, what shall we tell them? That what was our contribution as this was happening? I used to ask my father as a child on how they could let Idi Amin rule for 9 years. But here we are, stuck 40 years and still counting. When I tell my children that President Museveni came to power when I was in lower primary, they look at me as if I'm some kind of, maybe it's a mental problem. But I was 9 years old. And here we are. Many of you were not even born. Here we are stuck in the middle of this desert, democratic desert called Uganda. How do we get ourselves out? When you look at the character, the character of the democratic citizenship of Uganda, how do we define it? Who protects a voter? Who protects an ordinary citizen? Because some of these abuses go beyond the electoral period. They go beyond the electioneering. The enforced disappearances in Noop have been continuous since 2020. And Uganda Law Society, a continuous abuse of rights of a particular group of people, according to Article 7 of the Rome Statute, is defined as crimes against humanity. I've been asking your president, why don't you send a reference to the ICC on continuous enforced disappearances for now 5 years and we are still counting? The Rome Statute is very clear. We are a signatory. When you look at the state of the rule of law, of course, in the country, where the Law Society is a custodian and the eyes of the public, the recent World Justice Project ranked us 121 out of 142 in terms of rule of law. That's our score. Well explained in that report, the Rule of Law Index. When you check the civic space, the Civicus Monitor, which reports about civic space globally, released the latest report early this year, and Uganda is ranked as regressed in that report. When you check the latest democracy index by the International Democracy and Engagement Assistance Idea, we are ranked as authoritarian. When you check the Freedom Index by Freedom House, we are ranked as not free. These are global reports. But we know what we go through, and Marik has summarized what many Ugandans are going through in this country. Sometimes you don't need to read these reports. We know what we are experiencing as citizens. We know what we are witnessing. And the question remains, what do we do? What can we do that we haven't done? The elephant in the room is the conflict regarding the role of the army and the role of police in going about their work, and of course the civil-military relations in the country. Article 209B is very clear. Article 209 is about the functions of the army. It states very clearly that the army can engage or act or collaborate with other civilian agencies in situations of disaster and emergency. When you go to Article 212D, it says that the police can work and collaborate with other civilian agencies in doing their work. Is the army a civilian agency? No. Does the Constitution, therefore, guide in what circumstances the army can engage in civilian duties, disaster, and emergency? Continuously, the police in this country have made it a habit to hide behind the Constitution in surrendering their duties to the army and surrendering civilians for the slaughter of the army. The army, which is largely partisan, unfortunately, treats opposition, treats media, treats human rights defenders as enemies of the state. And then you have the police in abuse of the Constitution, hiding behind these two articles. I want to invite the Law Society to help us resolve this controversy. Under what circumstances should we be seeing the army on our streets? And if the radical new bar cannot help resolve this controversy, which is at the heart of rule of law matters in this country, then there will be no radicalness in this bar that we love so much. Then we shall not be back on track until we define how the army interacts with citizens of this country. Look at the ugly events in Gulu. I've been telling people, because I come from the cattle keeping region, that there is no cattle owner that can subject his cattle to the whipping of civilians we saw in Gulu. Cattle, cows are no longer beaten. But the army, using, that stick for keeping cattle, for herding cattle, descends on people, members of the opposition, in broad daylight, beat them on camera, and business goes on as usual. As if we are a normal country. We have been traumatized enough that it's easy to move on. I don't know whether hoping tomorrow will be better or worse, but we all forget the things and move on. How can it be? How shall we get back on track? My sister, how shall we be back on track without resolving the controversy of the army, the impunity of the army in this country? Of course, we have other irregularities that have happened. Blocking rallies, I think in 5 districts now. That level of impunity, that you can close a highway, stop a presidential campaign from going to campaign in a gazetted district. That you can close a candidate to sleep on the road or spend 5+ hours on the road. During 2021 elections, Electoral Commission was hiding behind COVID, hiding their incompetence behind COVID. But there is no COVID now. I don't know what excuse Justice Byabakama will invent in his incompetence. Of course, we shall not forget his illegal pronouncement that voters cannot stay at a polling station. Also threatening the rights of voters, inviting the army to beat them, and he did say that they would be harvested like grasshoppers. A chair of Electoral Commission. If we were a serious country, he would not be holding that office. But of course we are not. What are the principles that can promote democracy in any country? The first one, of course, is rule of law. Ours is contested, constrained. It only favors the rich. Independent institutions, of course, we are paying the price for the life presidency and total state capture in the country. Active citizenry. I don't think we have even 3% of active citizens in this country. Because if we did, this impunity would not be happening. And of course, then free and fair elections and transparency and accountability. When it comes to matters elections, I want to give another challenge to the Uganda Law Society, and that does not include us. It's not that we think you should do everything. We are also here and we can partner. Can we help this country define what an election is and put it in law? I know that we have enough laws really to conduct a normal, free and fair election, as much as we need more reforms, but laws are not self-implementing. Even the few laws that we have, nobody's implementing them. So I don't think that even the campaign for reforms is what we need in this country. Can we first make sure that laws are respected and implemented? So we need as a country to define what an election should be and what are the minimum standards of an election. Failure of which, then that exercise should not be called an election. And if we can achieve this, like this exercise Justice Byabakama is presiding over, is an arete. Why do I call it an arete? And I want to give 2 examples of what previous chairs of Electoral Commission have done. The first one, Justice Chairman Akabwai, Stephen. When the army interfered with elections in Guru, campaigning for Honorable Betu Gombe against Norbert Mao, Justice Akabwai wrote the first warning that the army must have no role in elections. They ignored it. He sent his deputy, who was then Haj Aziz Kasuja, on the ground. Once Aziz Kasuja came with a report, he stopped that election. After further assessment, he declared Norbert Mao the winner. They didn't go to voting. When Aziz Kasuja later becomes the chair, a by-election in Urukunjiri, and the army interferes at the beginning of reform agenda. Extreme media. He writes to the president, withdraw the army or I cancel elections. And the army was withdrawn. But here we are with a justice of constitutional court that cannot exercise his powers to deliver a credible election in Uganda. So we need to define minimum standards for an election so that when the army comes in and beats people in Guru, that whole exercise is nullified. And if time runs out, then the current president leaves office and the vice president takes over, like the constitution provides. We need to move to that level to deal with the impunity of the army in our elections, to deal with characters who vulgarize democracy in this country. We need also, and this is my 3rd recommendation as I conclude, we need also, led by the Radical Nuba, to drag the IGP to court to explain under what circumstances does he invite the army to torture Ugandans in the day-to-day policing that is his duties in the Constitution. Under what circumstances does he hand over his work to the army? And who is accountable for the violations of the army against Ugandans pretending to be doing law and order work that belongs to the police? I thank you very much.
Very vocal, very biting, very direct, very unfiltered, and not caring what else anyone else thinks, because that is the role of such an individual, very respected and assertive. Thank you so much, Doctor, for the very deep discussion. Very short, but entailing. We appreciate that. We really appreciate. This is not the first time. You've always put us to task. You've always asked us to do the things that you know within the power we have, we can do, and we continue to receive the challenge. You have left us with so much to do. The 2 questions that you have asked are very critical. The role of the army, citing the articles in the Constitution 209 vis-a-vis 212, which of course also puts the police into question of how to collaborate and whether the army is a civilian agency. And of course, the history painted of Idi Amin, the late, may his soul rest in peace, of 9 years, of course, leaves us wondering, because of course, as we are, some of us began with the president of Uganda as the president himself, and that's a question we've been answering from primary one, who is the president of Uganda. And I won't say my age, but clearly 40 years down the road, we are still answering the same question. And you said it's counting easily. Yes, we are counting, and we are stuck. We are stuck in a trench, and we wonder how to come out. The answers lie in the continued fight, the continued rule of law pursuance, and the continued questions being asked, especially given that these departments are hiding behind the Constitution. Is the Constitution weak? Is it that we cannot use the Constitution anymore to advance the rule of law? The principles that you have identified of formidable democracy, rule of law, independent institutions, active citizenry, free and fair elections, and finally transparency and accountability are principles that we are all aware of, but we have failed to collect ourselves as a people, as a responsible citizenry that can come together and show that numbers will speak more than authority. Woo upon the Electoral Commission chairperson from what you've said.
Abalungi abatuuliriza era abatulaba olunaku olwaleero tuchaddeko ewa Sheikh Asiraf Dembe.
Sebo sanyusa okubalaba amannya agange nze Sheikh Asiraf Dembe akola ku bizibu by'enjawulo. Omuntu singa aba alina ebirwadde tumusomereddwa, tumuwa amazzi ga lukuya nga bw'obadde ogalaba, tugenda abantu ku kyoto ne twokya emizimu emibi egibabaamu n'okulomba edduwa. Abantu singa abeera ng'ali wano atuuse sobola okumulombera edduwa, ne waba atatuuse nga mpadde amannya ge naye ng'ali wala. Neetaase ennamba yange yeeno eri 0707363711. Nammwe bannyinaffe abali ebweru oyagala okuba nti oyagala okulombera ku dduwa ng'olina ebizibu, viza zibuze, amaka gakolongotana, sente zikola zimpita mu ngalo, ojja kumpeereza ekifaananyi kyo n'amannya go, ebyo byokka bijja kummala, nja kukulombera edduwa, ojja kutereera. Olunaku olusembayo mu mwezi mba n'edduwa ey'awamu ffenna n'abalwadde bange abakadde n'abapya. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.